Senator Carper.
Some of us wanted to hear those other questions, but I'll go ahead.
Really.
Thanks. Our thanks to all of you for joining us today. My thanks to our chair and to our ranking member for pulling this together. It wasn't that many years ago, I think it was 2016, that the chairman and I worked with the Department of Homeland Security and stakeholders on a bill to address violent extremism. And our legislation would have done a number of things. It would have created an office for partnerships against violent extremism, as Mr. Salim will recall, within the Department of Homeland Security. And building on Mr. Salim's work in the Obama administration, our bill would have established an office reporting directly to the Secretary to lead the government's efforts to counter violent extremism. And further, our bill would have put in place important accountability measures to protect civil rights and civil liberties and ensure congressional oversight of administration efforts to counter violent domestic terrorism. That bill passed out of this committee. I think it was on a voice vote, but it passed without opposition, as I recall, over 2 years ago. It was not taken up by the full Senate. Since then, the current administration has rescinded grants administered by that office, cut its budget, renamed it not once but twice, and created additional reports between the director and the secretary. Now, I would just ask Mr. Salim, could you just share with us today some of your thoughts, please, on the need for congressional oversight of administration efforts to counter domestic terror and violent extremism? And the second half of my question would be, do you think that statutory authorization, including strong reporting requirements, such as were required in our bill, are a good first step?
Senator Carper, thank you for your question, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to having appeared before both you and Chairman Johnson before on this specific issue, and I appreciate the diligence and the sincerity to which you and other members of this committee have given this over the years. So thank you for your question. I think it reflects some of the history that you and this committee have brought to this issue specifically. Two initial points to start to answer your question. It's important to point out, as a number of members of this committee have noted already, data drives policy. And it's so important when we're making policy in the Homeland Security or in the national security space to have the data that drives and depicts the accurate the threat or risk that we as a country face. One of the pieces of legislation that's pending right now that would support achieving a clearer picture is the Data Act that I think is pending before both the House and soon to be the Senate. This is a key piece of legislation that I think can fill some of the critical gaps, and I would urge this committee to help.
There have been several data acts over even in recent years. Do you recall the prime sponsors in the Senate?
I will put that in my written response if that's okay, Senator.
Thanks very much.
I have it here in my notes, but I don't want to waste too much of your time. The second thing to address your question specifically is a pending piece of legislation currently titled the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act. This does, again, what a number of members of this committee have noted in terms of codifying into law the resources tailored to the threat picture today. As this committee attempted to do several years ago and is interested in engaging on again today, having an accurate picture to make data-driven policy and programmatic decisions coupled with statutory appropriations and authorizations of offices that have required reporting on an annualized basis can help give this committee and this Congress a better sense of where these trends are going year in and year out and where resources can be more accurately applied.
All right, thanks very much. Mr. Braniff, a question for you if I could. Tragically, in recent years, we've seen an increase in targeted violence, especially gun violence perpetrated in our country. In horrific instances, we've seen domestic terrorist attacks against minorities. They've occurred against people of color in Charleston, South Carolina, against immigrants in El Paso, Texas, and last month, and against religious groups in places of worship such as mosques. All around our country and in synagogues and any number of places from Poway, California to the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I would ask Mr. Brennan, you lay out your extensive data graphs in your testimony highlighting the rise of domestic terrorism in the United States, looking back, I think, as far as the 1970s. And we've seen these attacks surge in just the last couple of years. Could you just highlight for us what you believe to be the main reasons for the most recent spike in domestic terrorism in this country. Main reasons for the most recent spike in domestic terrorism in this country.
Thank you, Senator Carper. We should note that domestic terrorism is a persistent threat in the United States, so it is, there's been an uptick in recent years, but it is not like it came out of nowhere. There's a very large population of individuals who have espoused violence to advance a political agenda in the United States, and that is more of an enduring fact than a recent trend. In recent years, we have seen an uptick in violence emerging from those extremist movements, and I think there are probably a host of reasons. We're talking about political violence and politics are interrelated. That's uncomfortable and true. There have been, so there appears to be an emboldened movement in the United States over the last several years, and we see things like targeting preferences shift according to political rhetoric. So the anti-immigrant verbiage or political rhetoric is reflected in anti-immigrant targeting. We also see social media or online platforms that enable the most virulent of these individuals to find each other online and to exacerbate one another's tendencies. Researchers might call this the gamification of violence, where one individual seeks to one-up another that he or she has never met, but tries to get a higher body count in their next violent attack. This kind of deviant behavior facilitated online and you know, allows individuals to groupthink themselves into greater and greater levels of violence. You are correct in your question when you referenced firearms. The availability of firearms, although that's not new, is interrelated with the level of violence. And we see that in the United States, by far, firearms are involved in the most lethal terrorist attacks, or the most lethal terrorist attacks involve firearms.
Thank you for, I thought, an excellent answer to a pretty good question. Thank you.